All right, so let's talk about the parable found in Luke 18:9-14. I received something in the mail today. It was a letter describing this parable found in Luke, and I thought it was very powerful. And suddenly, also, I found myself writing and reading some on pride. So we'll fit that in just a little bit. But so it says, when Jesus was talking to those who trusted in themselves and their own righteousness, he used a parable that contrasted the two different ways to approach God. Okay, so it describes these two men go to a temple to pray. It says, one man's words hit the temple floor as soon as they fell from his lips, while the other prayer sped directly to heaven. The first man was a Pharisee. He was a member of the religious sect of Judaism, and that focused on the law and the traditions. And they were the most respected men in society and the community because of their careful obedience to laws and the traditions. And they knew all the rules down to every detail. That way they weren't breaking them, but they could also get around and do what they needed to do. But they weren't sinners, okay? So the other man was a tax collector who worked for the Roman government. The Jews thought that tax collectors were traitors to the Jewish nation, and they were known as dishonest swindlers. They extorted money, and they were classified in the same category as sinners and prostitutes, and they were considered unclean because of their occupation. So he goes on to talk about the Pharisee approached God with pride. It says in verse 11, the Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself. Although he came to God's temple, he was actually praying to himself. It's this proud approach, it's self-centeredness and sees no need for mercy that doesn't allow God the need for forgiveness. And it says, he went on to say, I thank you that I am not like the other people, the swindlers, the unjust, the adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast 2 times a week. I go to church 2 times a week. I read this. I pay my tithes all the time, and probably even more than I should. Just want to put that part in there. And he came to pray not because he needed God's help, but to express in God's approval. We all love approval. I mean, think about it. No one likes being, disapproved or not liked or shunned or rejected. Everybody loves approval. But that's the thing. We don't have to seek God's approval through our own works. Anyways. It says the tax collector approached God with repentance. He stood at a distance, shunning public attention, feeling so convicted by his sin that he wouldn't even raise his eyes to heaven. He was beating his breast in distress over his sinful condition, and all he could say was, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. His humble prayer was exactly what was required for salvation, Jesus said. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. Verse 14. Proud and self-sufficient people don't know they need mercy because they don't think they've done anything to require it. They will never come to Christ until their pride is shattered or their ego. And they finally see their hopeless condition. No one is ever saved apart from conviction of sin. If you're not convicted, one thing I talk about to some friends of mine also is that even though, in my spiritual journey, a lot of things that I used to do, I was never convicted about. And now that I choose, I'm not perfect and I'm nowhere close to it. And I can't be, and I never will try to be. But with that, trying to live the best way I can and the way God would want me to, and Jesus, is that I'm convicted a lot of times over certain things. So sometimes, conviction is good. If our heart is not convicted, that's an issue because none of us are perfect. So that is a big sign that, hey, maybe you have a big dose of pride that you need to rid of before you're even worthy, or before God is even worthy to be in your presence and to give you forgiveness. They will never come to Christ until pride is shattered and they finally see their hopeless condition. No one is ever saved apart from conviction of sin, because a self-righteous person doesn't see himself as a sinner and therefore has no need for God or salvation. So in churches today, many people are told that Jesus will forgive them and come into their life if they ask him. But you can't simply add Jesus to an old life without turning from it, repenting. There's a difference. And, repenting is turning completely around and going in the other direction of sin, of a known sin. I mean, we all have sin. We're sinful creatures, okay? But doing the same thing over and over and over and knowing it and still doing it, that is not repenting in any way. You need an entirely new life, and it begins with the Spirit's conviction of your sin, which causes you to feel the weight of your guilt and your need for God's mercy. So today, reflect on this. Are you the Pharisee or are you the tax collector? Are you the prideful or are you the one that is seeking God's mercy because you need him? Are you self-righteous, or do you find your righteousness through the perfect Son of God, Jesus? That's a question you have to ask for yourself. And you have to be honest with yourself. And if you don't really feel convicted about anything that you're doing in your life, maybe you're not thinking deep enough into it. Because, news alert, we're all sinful creatures. We're going to sin. And if you don't have any conviction in your heart, then I can tell you this: it's not because you're not doing anything wrong. It's because you're just ignoring it, or you don't see you're wrong.